Going to talk a little bit about structures and enumerations. First, we'll start with enums. An enum is a data type that you define. It's basically used to store constant text-based names. And what C# does is it assigns an integer value to each of those names. The text-based names are obviously easier to remember and understand than numbers. So if we had maybe a enum with days of the week that we called weekdays, obviously weekdays.Sunday is easier to remember than referring to Sunday as the number 0 or the number 1, whatever you wanted to number it. So to create an enumeration, you use the keyword enum followed by what you are going to call it. And keep in mind that whatever you call it it's going to be like a data type. You can create variables of that type. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then the text values can't have spaces in them, and they will have commas after them. And then you'll get to the last one that will not have a comma, and they will all be enclosed in curly braces. So here's an example with days of the week. And by default, the compiler does consider the first item in your list to have a integer value of 0. However, you can totally control that. So if you look at this little example, in your enumeration, you can actually set a default value. And from that point on, it'll just start sequentially numbering. So if we wanted Sunday to be a 1 instead of a 0, we can do that, and then the rest of the days will follow. So it's pretty flexible. So if you had, let's say, departments, and you wanted maybe starting at HR, that to be 10, maintenance 11, manufacturing sales to go up sequentially from there. You just say start HR at 10 and the rest will follow. If you wanted these all to be different integers, well, you can assign them whatever number you want. So the process is pretty flexible. So that's how you create them. How do you use them? By default, the value that is associated with them is an integer. However, if you wanted to use a different integer type or a different whole number type like short or byte, you could. Okay? You would just, after the variable name that you're going to associate with the enum, you just put in a colon and whatever data type you wanted to use. To create a variable using an enumeration, as I said, the name of the enumeration is your data type. So you will use that name to create a variable, and then you will set it equal to, and it's going to be that enumeration data type, a dot, and then it has to be one of the values in the list. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. If you have a very short list, it is nice because it does ensure that you've got accurate data. I mean, it's not going to allow anything outside of that list to be entered. Okay, so by default, if you do write the enum variable to the console, you will get the value. If for some reason you wanted to get the number, you can do a little typecast. And if you aren't sure if the enum is going to be used or not, you can create a nullable version. And I see this quite a lot. in our upper level classes. And enums are also used quite a bit. When we get into doing full-blown web apps, where we have drop-down lists with very set specific values, enums work great. And so you will be seeing these in the future. um, Here is a programming example. And because I do have a nullable value, I did use get value or default. I use that little method because it is used with nullable values. Just to show you if there was a difference between using it and not using it. So in this little example, I have a genre enum, and that is basically for movies. And then you can see that I've created kind of this nullable value here. I'm asking what genre of movie do you like? I'm having them pick from a list. And then I'm going into a switch, and you can see that I'm assigning movie genre to the genre, which is basically the data type for the enum, dot, and then a value from the list. And if they didn't pick one of the values that I had listed, I can set it to null because I made it nullable. Okay, so then here is the output. And you can see the first one, I just printed out whatever the movie genre was. The second one, I typecasted as an integer. Okay, so let's look at those first. So here, what genre do you like? We did R. You picked rom-com as your favorite, so that's the first one. But then when I typecasted as an integer, I returned the number 3. Okay, and then when I did movie genre dot get value or default, it came back with rom-com. So in order for me to get the number, I had to typecast that as well. So enums are super useful. And it is something that you will be seeing in the future, and it is something I incorporated into your assignment. Let's see, moving on to structures. A structure is considered a composite type because it's made up of different data types. And it is similar to a class. In fact, a lot of structures, you can actually change the keyword struct to class, it'll compile and run. So they are very similar. The main difference is that a structure goes into the stack and a class goes into the heap. So a structure is has a value type, and a class has a reference type. And the biggest implication for that is copying. If I create a structure and I copy it, I have 2. Okay, they're in 2 different places over in the stack, 2 separate variables. But if I copy an object, a class object, I only have 1. Okay, so I basically have 2 objects looking at the same place in memory. And so that's a huge distinction between the 2. So structures can contain fields and methods and constants, parameterized constructors, properties, indexers. I mean, they can contain pretty much the same stuff that a class does. And the way you create them is similar. You have an access modifier. Okay, so private, public, and then you've got the keyword struct, and then you've got the name of the structure, and then you're going to give it the fields or the member variables, and then you'll give it the methods. So let's take a look at a movie structure. So I've got some private members here, title, description, rating, and genre. And genre is nullable. And I will tell you that it is the enum genre that we are pulling in here. Yes, a structure can include an enum. And then I've got a parameterized constructor, which is accepting data passed from main, and it is populating all of my fields with that data. I also have a method called set values, where main is passing data and I'm setting it. And so what is the difference between set values and a parameterized constructor? A constructor is called when something is created, and set values is called after it's created. Okay, so one is during the creation process, and the other one is kind of after the fact. And then you'll notice that I have a little display method down here. So even though structures kind of look like classes, they are not the same thing. Okay? The memory difference is kind of a big deal. Um, but a couple other key concepts that you need to remember is the compiler always creates a constructor to initialize values. Um, it does not allow you to create your own. You cannot create a default constructor. Okay? It is always going to create a constructor, period. With a class, we can create our own default constructor. We can do the parameterized one. Okay, it's got a little bit more flexibility, but a structure does not. Okay. You can initialize values using a parameterized constructor, which I just showed you. You cannot initialize values by setting them equal to a value uh, like a private string. You can't. So basically what this is saying is that when you declare it up here, you cannot say private string title equals blank, equals double quote, semicolon. Okay, it won't let you do that. Okay, so it won't let you declare it like this. Structures cannot be used as a base class for inheritance. So we are going to be getting into inheritance pretty soon. And the coolest thing about inheritance is the fact that you can reuse fields and methods, and you can't do that with structures. Also, you can create nullable variables, as you saw. And you can do that in both classes and structures. So some of the differences are kind of outlined here in this table. Huge difference, value type or reference type. So we know a structure is a value type, class is a reference type. Where do instances live? So we know in the structure, they live in the stack, and with a class, they live in the heap. Can you declare a default constructor? For a structure? No. For a class? Yes. Can you declare your own constructor? If you declare your own constructor, will the compiler still generate the default? With a structure, yes, it will. That's why you can't do it. So with a class, it will not. That is why with a class, you can do a default constructor. If you don't initialize a field, your own constructor, initialize a field in your own constructor, will the compiler automatically initialize it for you? So if we create our own constructor and we forget to initialize one of these guys, is the compiler going to be a nice guy and do it for us? With the structure, no, but with the class, yes. And that is because the area of memory that it's going into. Are you allowed to initialize instance fields at their point of declaration? Okay, we just talked about this. That would be when you declare them up here that you set them to zeros or blanks. Okay, with the class, yes. With the structure, no. Using a structure. So just creating the structure, it's kind of like a blueprint, just like a class. So it's not really reserving any area in memory until you actually use it and create a variable. And so to create a variable, you use the structure name, give the variable a name, and then say new followed by the name of the structure. So it's very much like creating a class object. So here again is our example. And you can see I am creating a movie structure variable up here at the top. Okay, and it's using the default constructor here, okay, that it automatically creates that I can't override. So it's initializing everything to blanks and zeros. Okay, and then we're asking for the title. We're reading it into a temporary variable. So I'm basically filling in all the data using temporary variables. And then I'm going to call set values, and I'm going to send those temporary variables up here to this method. And that's where the actual data is going to get placed into the fields that are in the structure. Now, one thing I want to point out, if you've not worked with enums before, that it is a little weird working with them because when you create, even if you create a little temporary variable like this, you still have to initialize it to a value that is in your, enum list. It doesn't just let you create genre, temp genre. You do have to set it equal to something that is in that list. Okay. And then of course, you can change it. Okay. But the minute you create an enum variable, then you are committed to setting it equal to something in the list. Okay. And then at the very bottom, here's where we're calling the display, and that's where it prints everything out. And I did use this control character, this \n, and that is a line break. And that's just kind of a nice way of doing it if you're returning a print string. So this example that we just looked at, we created the structure variable up here. So it used the default constructor, and then we used set values and passed it the data. So this example is going to be a little different. What we're going to do in this one, it's still the movie structure, but with this one, we are going to fill in all of the temp values first. And then when we create the structure variable, we're going to pass it the data. So we're going to use this parameterized constructor here. So the processing is just a little different to do it this way. So we don't start out by creating a structure variable. We actually fill in all of our temp variables first. And then down here, once we've got all of our data, this is where we create the structure variable. Okay, and then we pass it that data. Okay, and then we go ahead and call the display method. So it's just two different ways of getting the data into your fields. Now, copying a structure. So I mentioned earlier, when you copy a structure, because it is in the stack, you end up with two, which means that, you can you can change the first one without impacting the second one, and you can change the second one without affecting the first one. Okay, and so this little example shows you what I'm talking about. So again, we've got our movie, our movie structure. And here you'll notice that I added some set methods, okay, because I'm going to be copying one structure into another, and then I'm going to be changing some things. Okay, and because they're private fields, I have to change them using set methods, just like a class. Okay, so you can see I commented this out. So I am not using the default constructor. That's commented out. I'm filling everything in. And then I am creating the first movie structure variable here. And then this one is now filled in. And I'm creating a second one called new movie. And you'll see that I set it equal to movie. So at this point, they are duplicates of each other, okay? But they're in two different places in memory. So what that means is I can change some of the fields in new movie. I basically can change whatever I want, and it's not going to affect the movie structure. Okay, it won't affect that variable. Okay, so here I've changed a rating and a title, and then I'm printing out movie 2. Okay, and then I'm printing out movie 1. And if you look, you can see that movie 2, the title did change and the rating changed. Okay, but I didn't change the description or the genre, and those stayed the same. And I did not impact the first movie, okay, because this is stored under the structure variable name movie, and this is stored under the structure variable name new movie. Okay, and they're in two different places in stack memory. So changes to one are not going to affect the other.